everyone. How are you doing? Great. So my name is Mike Lee. I'm co-founder of a company called Alpha Food Labs, and I want to tell you a little bit about Alpha Food Labs and then talk about the Future Market, which is the project that we're exhibiting here today at Fancy Food. Alpha Food Labs is a platform for building and launching food products and companies that are meant to democratize healthy and sustainable food. That is our point of view. We're not just trying to create snacks for snack's sake. We want to really move the conversation ahead for health and sustainability in the world, and doing that through a lens of product development. Me and my two co-founders have a ton of experience kind of investing, building, and connecting food brands. And Alpha Food Labs is made up of two sister companies that are integral to our success. First is Food Tech Connect, which my co-founder and founder Danielle Gould is in the audience right now of Food Tech Connect. That is the world's largest media and connection platform that connects 40,000 innovators worldwide in the world of food. And then the second project here, which I want to spend some more time to talk about today, is the Future Market. And the Future Market is our Futurist Food Lab. The Future Market's goal is to explore how we'll produce, shop, and consume food over the next 5 to 25 years. It's a conceptual grocery store that features over 28 conceptual products, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. But to talk about the future, I actually want to go back into the past, deep into the past to the 1940s, actually, where my grandfather came over from Hong Kong to Detroit to start one of the first Chinese restaurants around. And he was a really successful innovator at that, and he really kind of taught me this early lesson of going where no one else is going and having the bravery to really build something that you see in your head. So part of growing up in Detroit with my grandfather, one of the things we loved to do was to go to the auto show, the Detroit Auto Show. And I'm not necessarily a car nut at all, but the thing that I really loved about the auto show was this. It was the concept cars. And I love that this huge industry, the auto industry, which is just about the size of the food industry, could codify this whole method of saying, we're going to create something that doesn't exist and it doesn't have to be for sale, but it's meant to just show where our thoughts are headed, where we want the future to end up. And that really stuck with me, and that was a really profound thing, seeing these concept cars. Now you fast forward a lot of years to working in the food industry, and I walk around and I sort of say, where is this for food? There's not the same level, I think, in some pockets of pushing the envelope into sort of conceptual visions and aggressive visions of the future. So we created the Future Market to really fill that need, and the mantra of what we do is really this: better innovation in food today starts with more ambitious thinking about tomorrow. We have a lot of problems to solve in the world, and through the lens of food, if we're not looking ahead far enough while we're looking kind of in the short term, we're going to be caught flat-footed when massive change kind of comes to hit us. So we created the Future Market. You can see sort of the exhibit that we have in the back of the Esplanade Ballroom here. This is an early concept drawing of what the inside of the market looks like. This is a little bit of, this is from the June show in New York that we did here at Fancy Food. And the goal again and for us is to explore and define what the future of food can mean through these concept products. This is important because the way people eat is radically changing. The way we make food needs a radical change as well, too. Now, the writing's on the wall. You can see a lot of these trends that big food is evolving, albeit slowly. They've lost $18 billion in market value from 2009 to 2015, and that trend continues as well. Small food is getting bigger, meanwhile. Many of the companies that are exhibiting here had modest starts and becoming giants in and of themselves. And consumers are really wanting better food, and that's what's driving this drive towards smaller players to meet those needs. You're seeing traditional companies lose market share to the new mainstream. Companies like Honest, Justin's, Kind, Vita Coco, these are sort of becoming the new mainstream big legacy companies, actually. And then there's another fleet of companies that are really close right behind that are coming up behind them as well, too. So the pressure is not ending. And as a result, the big companies know this is happening, and they've all set up certain vehicles to reach out and interact with and invest in and acquire some of these smaller players. So a lot of this is driven by kind of, millennials and Gen Z, which have enormous spending power, and we talk a lot about this segment here. This is a projection from A.T. Kearney from 2017 to 2037. The spending power of this segment is going to go up to about $260 billion. Another fact that's really interesting is that for the first time ever, teens are spending more on food than clothing. This is a report from Piper Jaffray. And you kind of think why this is happening. Why is that happening? And you think about when you were a teenager, what are the things that you bought to try to express your identity and express control over your life? It could have been clothing, it could have been a car. For teens right now, it's becoming food. Food has become a sentiment of control. It's a way to define identity. It's a way to define community. Growing up as a millennial is tough. It's coming up in a tough economy, uncertain political environment. There are so many things that you can't control, although food has become the thing that you can control. So maybe you don't have an influence over some sort of political situation directly, but you can influence what goes on your plate and what vote you give for the kind of food that you want to have. And that's really what's driving a lot of this kind of millennial control around food. So essentially what's happening here is food is shifting from being supply-driven to demand-driven. There once was upon a time where food companies could just produce what they wanted to, create huge distribution networks, massive advertising campaigns, and sort of just shove this stuff through the system and have it be okay. That worked for a while, but I don't think it's really sufficient enough anymore. It's really more of a matter of being consumer-centric and customer-centric on people's needs. Food tribes really represent these growth opportunities. This is a little bit of an eye chart, but there are a number of kind of small food tribes that we constantly look at because we think that their behaviors may bleed over into the mainstream. And so there's some obvious ones that you might have heard of, things like just people who are eating paleo or CrossFit or people that are into yoga or vegetarianism. But then there's other really tapped categories that I think we don't spend enough time as a food industry treating, looking at people with autoimmune diseases, cancer, IBS, so on and so forth. The 21st century eater, we define it as the intersection of these three things. The 21st century eater is a lot of things, but I think the thread that kind of goes through everything is that they all want healthful, delicious, and sustainable food at the same time. I don't think it's going to be sufficient in the future to be a successful food company if you can't hit on all three of these. I think right now you can do one or two of these, but I think the consumer is becoming more discriminating, and there's so much choice that if you don't kind of service this trifecta of needs, somebody else will. So coming back to how we kind of influence this and how we want to try to inspire the next generation of food products, the Future Markets products, like Gretchen said, we're all dedicated to hitting on people, planet, and profit all at the same time. Again, we think this is another trifecta that all companies have to hit on in the future to be successful. The Future Market, like those concept cars, we've created 28 concept products. So again, these products aren't in existence beyond the prototypes that we've made inside of our own lab, but they exist to inspire and provoke thoughts about what could happen in the future as early stage trends today inflate into mainstream trends tomorrow. The future of food, we believe, is rooted in the present. So we're not just writing fantasy. This is not just us making science fiction up and developing things from thin air. We really look at things that are kind of on the edges. The edges meaning people that are in niche kind of areas doing some sort of research that is kind of slowly getting off the ground, or a behavior that's happening in a small tribe of people. If you want to affect change today or tomorrow, you really have to look on the edges to get ahead of the game to see where the people are going to be. It's not enough to be inspired looking at the mainstream. So we look at the edges and we look at these things we call weak signals. So it might be a technology or a trend that's kind of just getting off the ground, and we look at that small trend and we say, what if we amplify that? And we say, what happens when that goes mainstream? What does that look like in terms of a product or a service that you might encounter in your average day at the grocery store? So there's a number of themes that we look at when we do this. One is personalization, which is on the tip of everyone's tongue right now. You've got companies like Day 2 looking at your microbiome to try to predict how your blood sugar responds to different kinds of foods. This is a company that's doing research right now and actively trying to advance that science. You look at companies like Habit, which Campbell's just invested in, trying to find personalized food for you. So the sentiment is there, although we arguably don't have the resolution yet to get a one-for-one food for each person yet. I think we're trying to get there, and we're trying to get to a more personalized view of how we eat food. So for us, one of the concept products we created was a pill called Analyze Me. And Analyze Me is a concept product where you swallow this pill and it can analyze your microbiome on a daily basis and send out the data and use that data to create foods that are customized to exactly the microbiome content that you have. It's a really fantastical concept, but it's actually rooted in a pill that's an actual pill right here that gastroenterologists use today to scan the insides of your body. So they can make you swallow this and they can scan video, they can have temperature, pH, pressure, all these readings that they use to analyze the inside of your body. So it's not terribly far-fetched, but we think it's an interesting thing that people could be starting to do this as a way to collect data about their own bodies and their insides. What might you do with that data? So maybe you could have a product like this concept product called Custom Culture. Custom Culture is a simple product. It's a yogurt, but it's customized to your microbiome. And so we imagine that if you can collect this data about your microbiome and other elements of your health, why couldn't you create products that are completely customized to it? So this is the area that we're playing in with these concept products around personalization. Transparency is another big issue. It's all on the tip of our tongues as well right now too, and we just released a concept product this week called Blockbirds. Blockbirds is, again, rooted in a simple idea. It's chicken in a package, but the difference is that we're trying to show what it might look like when you have something like blockchain technology there to soak up the entire audit trail of what that chicken did and ate and lived and behaved as it grew up. So what you can see there on the side, it's a little hard to see at this scale, but there's an e-ink screen on the package here that has the entire point of origin, farming, growing practices, et cetera, about what this chicken did and ate while it was being grown. Waste is another issue that's also on the tip of our tongues. Up to 40% of the food in the United States is never eaten, but at the same time, 1 in 8 Americans struggle to put enough food on the table. This is a paradox that we need to try to solve. And one of the ways that we tackled this was looking at the meat industry and noticing from a lot of the butchers and retailers that we talked to that there's always sort of these celebrated cuts of the beef cattle that people always go after. It's all about things like the ribeye. And we think that there's other pieces of meat that are more deserving as well too. So we want to try to create a system where you could have a full animal utilization bento box. This is a product called Holy Cow where we sort of force people to say you're going to have to buy a little piece of the entire cow instead of just focusing on the celebrity cuts that you really like. So in essence, this is 1% of the cow. If you bought 100 of these, you'd ostensibly have the entire cow in one fell swoop. Healthy oceans is another theme we look at a lot too. We look at things like lionfish, which are invasivores. Invasivores invade the ecosystem and kind of wreck the natural balance of what's happening in that ecosystem, and they're sort of pests. What if we could catch those invasivores and solve that problem by spinning it into something fun that we call Aquacul? It's a kid's fish stick product, so it's kind of a fun twist on something that's a little bit scary, like a lionfish. We also kind of look at the oceans and we think about things like shark fin soup, which have been kind of polarizing things for sort of the inhumane treatment with sharks. And we say, can something like cellular agriculture or lab-grown meat create a shark fin so that you could still have this dish that's very culturally important to Chinese culture, but not have to harm sharks in the process? So it's an example of how technology can sort of help a sustainability goal and a cultural goal. But the biggest theme that we really hit on a lot is creating demand for sustainable agriculture. We want to try to make sustainable ag as sexy of a topic out there as some of these other topics that people talk about as they market their food. And we were deeply inspired by what Dan Barber did years ago with his rotation risotto, where he took a series of rotational grazing crops and he turned them into a really delicious risotto dish. And it was great for us because what he did was he used the artistry of a chef to really communicate that sustainability can be super, super delicious. We wanted to sort of try and democratize that idea and say, okay, Dan Barber's doing his version of it at his fine dining restaurant, which only a certain percentage of people can go to. How do we do something that is for sort of everybody and is democratized? So we created a product called Crop Crisps. Crop Crisps is essentially a 4-flavor cracker, which is based off of each of the crops you'd find in a crop rotation. So you'd plant a wheat, you plant a legume, you plant a wheat, and you plant a legume, and over and over and over. And the reason why you do that is because it helps fix nitrogen into the soil and keeps the soil and the plants healthy with less use of pesticides and fertilizers and things like that. We also created a product called Kernza Crunch, which is just kids' cereal that is based off of a perennial wheatgrass called Kernza. Kernza has a much larger root structure than the average wheat, and as a result, what it does is it helps with soil health immensely. It has amazing benefits. It's being researched quite a bit right now, and we want to say, how can you build a product that gives $1 billion of demand to this form of agriculture and reinforces a better way of growing wheat? And finally, Three Sisters is another product that we did, which is based off of the Three Sisters, which is corn, beans, and squash. It's the original polyculture, and what happens is when you grow these three plants together, you get another really synergistic benefit where the plants sort of sustain themselves and don't need as much help from fertilizers and pesticides. And we turned this into a simple product, which was an instant polenta. So sustainability and health should be scalable, and this is one of the big theses that we have, and we try to look at that through a CPG lens and try to say, how do we take the big food playbook and kind of hack it and put a more sustainable message inside of it? And that's a really big mission for us, and that's something we continue to do with Alpha Food Labs and the Future Market as we build these products. So I'll leave you with this, the idea that the future of food, a lot of people talk about the future of food and try to predict the future of food, but we have to understand that it's still being written, and we're not just passive observers of what's happening in the future of food. We're all active participants, and I hope you'll join me in helping to build that better future. Thank you.